It was about a fella that was driving down a country road, and all of a sudden I looked out, and there beside him was a chicken. He was doing about 45, and the chicken was running alongside. So he stepped on the gas, he got it up to about 60, and the chicken caught up with him and was right beside him again, and then he thought, as he was looking at him, that the chicken had 3 legs. But before he could really make up his mind for sure, the chicken took off out in front of him at 60 miles an hour, turned down a lane into a barnyard. Well, he made a quick turn and went down into the barnyard, too, and there was a farmer standing there. And he asked him, he said, did a chicken come past you? And he said, yeah. Well, he said, am I crazy, or did the chicken have 3 legs? And he says, yep, it's mine. He says, I breed 3-legged chickens. And the fellow said, for heaven's sakes, why? Well, he says, I like the drumstick, Ma likes the drumstick, and now the kid likes the drumstick, and we just got tired of fighting for him. And the driver said, well, how does it taste? He says, I don't know. I've never been able to catch one. As Henry VIII said to each one of his 6 wives, I won't keep you long. The joke they tell is that an American and a Russian were arguing about the differences between our 2 countries. And the American said, look, in my country, I can walk into the Oval Office, I can hit the desk with my fist and say, President Reagan, I don't like the way you're governing the United States. And the Russian said, I can do that. The American said, what? He says, I can walk into the Kremlin, into Brezhnev's office, I can pound Brezhnev's desk, and I can say, Mr. President, I don't like the way Ronald Reagan is governing the United States. And while Gorbachev was here, I even made him write 100 times, I will not cheat, I will not cheat. Well, now, during my presidency, I've always emphasized diplomacy. But sometimes it comes to the point you have to use force in foreign affairs. And here I am, arm wrestling General Noriega for Panama. On another trip, the government of Indonesia gave us these gifts, and they're our friends. I mean, I hope the environmentalists never find out about this one. We used to fly Air Force One over Wyoming low and shoot buffalo from the window. There was a fellow that was on his way to a mountain resort, and a policeman stopped him and said, did you know that you're driving without taillights? And the driver hopped out of the car. He was so badly shaken that the officer took pity on him and said, well, now, wait a minute, calm down. It's not that serious an infraction. The fellow said, it may not mean much to you, but to me it means I've lost my trailer, a wife, and 4 kids. I was in Las Vegas some years ago to address the annual Farm Bureau meeting. And on my way to the hall, a fellow recognized me and asked what I was doing in Las Vegas. And I told him I was there, what I was there for. And he said, what are a bunch of farmers doing in a place like Las Vegas? And I couldn't resist. I said, Buster, they're in a business that makes a Las Vegas crap table look like a guaranteed annual income. You know, there's a story about a pig and a chicken. They got tired of farm life, decided to find jobs in town. They no sooner arrived in town when a chicken spotted a sign in the window of a restaurant. It said ham and eggs, $1.25. The chicken suggested they go in and apply. And the pig said, wait a minute. For you, this job only requires a contribution. For me, it's a total commitment. One of my favorite stories about government had to do with an employee who sat at a desk, and papers came to his desk. He read them and determined where they were to go and initialed them and sent them on. And one day a classified document came there, but it came to him, so he read it, initialed it, and sent it on. 24 hours later, it came back to him with a note attached that said, you weren't supposed to see this. Erase your initials and initial the erasure. One example is a story they tell. You know, you have to wait 10 years there for delivery after you order an automobile. And so a fella had finally gotten the money together and was going to buy an automobile. Only about 1 out of 7 families have them in that country. And he went through all the paperwork and everything and finally signed the last paper, laid down his money, and then the man behind the counter said, come back in 10 years and get your automobile. And the man said, morning or afternoon? And wait. The fellow behind the counter says, well, what difference does it make 10 years from now? And he said, well, the plumber's coming in the morning. Mike Devers, in his book, said that I had a short attention span. Well, I was going to reply to that, but oh, what the hell, let's move on to something else. And one recently that I heard had to do with 3 dogs that were having a conversation, an American dog, a Polish dog, and a Russian dog. And the American dog was telling him about how, well, he barks, and then in our country, his master gives him some meat. And the Polish dog said, what's meat? And the Russian dog says, what's bark? I'm going to tell you this one. It's about General Secretary Gorbachev. Seems that as part of the campaign to straighten things out there in his country, he had issued an order that everyone caught speeding or seen speeding should get a ticket, no matter how important they might be. Well, one morning he was out at his country home and realized that he was running late for a meeting that he had in the Kremlin, and he went out to get in his car and told the driver to get in the back seat that he'd drive. And he did, and down the street he went, and they passed 2 motorcycle policemen, and the one of them took off after him. And a little while later he came back and joined his companion, the other motorcycle officer, and the fellow said, did you give him a ticket? And he said, no. Well, he said, why not? Well, he said, no, this was someone too important. Well, he said, we were told to give it no matter who it was, that they would get a ticket. No, he says, not that. Well, he said, who was it? Well, he said, I don't know, I couldn't recognize him there. But his driver is Gorbachev. Secretary Gorbachev. And they told him there was a woman in the Kremlin, she wouldn't leave unless she could see him. So he said, well, bring her in. And they brought her in. And he said, old mother, what is it? What? She said, I have a question. He said, all right. She said, was communism invented by a politician or a scientist? Well, he said, a politician. She said, that explains it. A scientist would have tried it on mice first. There's a story, and I understand it's true. It's about a newspaper photographer out in Los Angeles. Kind of reminds me of Howard. He was called in by his editor and told of a fire that was raging in Palos Verdes. That's a hilly area in the southern part of Los Angeles County. And the photographer's assignment was to rush down to a small local airport, board a waiting plane, go out and get some pictures of the fire and be back in time for the afternoon edition. Well, he raced down the freeway, broke all the traffic laws, got to the airport, drove his car to the end of the runway, and sure enough, there was a plane revving up its engines, ready to go. He jumped in the plane shouting, let's go, and they were off. At about 5,000 feet, he began getting his camera out of the bag, told the fellow flying the plane to get him over the fire so he could get his pictures and get back to the paper. And from the other side of the cockpit, there was a deafening silence. And then he heard those words he will always remember. Aren't you the instructor? It's a story about the parent with the 2 children and 2 sons, and one of them was a dyed-in-the-wool pessimist, and the other one was an incurable optimist. And they thought they were both so unrealistic that they talked to a psychiatrist about it, and he said he thought he could solve the problem. And they said, well, what? Well, he said, let's get the most magnificent set of toys any boy ever had, and we'll put him in a room. We'll take the pessimist there, and then we'll turn him loose, and when he sees those toys and knows they're all for him, he'll get over being a pessimist. Well, he said, what are you going to do about the optimist? Well, he said, I have a friend who's got a racing stable, and he said, we can get quite a quantity of what they clean out of the stable, and we'll put that in another room, and when the optimist has seen his brother get those toys, and then he gets that, he'll get over being an optimist. Well, they did it. Finally, after a period, they then went in and followed in where the boy was with the toys, and he was sitting there crying, and they said, what are you crying about? He said, well, I know somebody's going to come and take these away from me. And they went down to the room with the optimist, and he was on that top of that pile of stuff, and he was throwing it over his shoulder as fast as he could. And they said, "What are you doing?" He says, "There's got to be a pony in here somewhere."